Hello my friends and welcome. Today I would like to tell you about the history of the wonderful witches of this little island. Though not a witch in the most traditional sense, the Morrigan of Irish mythology bears a name often translated to Queen of the Phantoms. It is this, along with her undeniably spooky legacy, that merits her the very first spot on this list of witchy Irish women. Associated with war and death, she would often swoop over battlefields in the form of a bedraggled crow. The Morrigan first appeared in the stories of ancient Ireland as having a tumultuous relationship with the famed hero Cuchulainn. The two first met when she drove a cow from his territory. When he approached her but was unable to recognize her face, she became insulted in response and was angry. The hero grew defensive and arrogant, claiming she could do him no harm. Ominously, the Phantom Queen replied, "It is at the guarding of thy death that I am, and I shall be." Much later in life, Cuchulainn rode across Ireland to meet his enemies, only to encounter a haggard old woman, washing armor in a ford. On closer inspection, he saw that the breastplate and helmet were his own. This was an omen that foretold his fast approaching demise. The story itself has brought many to compare the Morrigan with the more widespread Irish harbinger of death, the Banshee. Crows too, of course, symbolize death in many cultures, making it fitting that later in the story, Cuchulainn's enemies do not believe that the hero is truly dead until a crow lands comfortably upon the shoulder of his corpse. The Loathly Lady is a motif that appears frequently in medieval literature. Specifically, it refers to a grotesque woman who becomes beautiful when approached by a man who doesn't judge her by her looks alone. Often, the lady's unattractiveness is revealed to have been the result of a curse, which her suitor has now broken, and they all live happily ever after. The Irish version, of course, is nowhere near as tidy. In Irish mythology, Dermot a Dubh was a member of the Fianna, a legendary band of warriors. One night, the group was visited by a shivering old woman who asked them for warmth and shelter. Only Dermot showed her any compassion, promising her that he would protect her throughout the night as she slept. By morning, the old woman had transformed into a fresh-faced young lady, and Dermot was besotted. The strange woman rewarded his gentleness by granting him a wish, to own a house by the sea. He begged her to live there with him, and she agreed on the singular condition that he never speak aloud of the form she took on the night when they first met. For a time, they lived happily. However, one day while Dermot was out hunting, his trusty greyhound gave birth to a litter of puppies. The lady gave them away. Dermot was furious, and asked her how she could treat him so unkindly, when he had so generously overlooked her ugliness at the time of their first meeting. True to her previous warning, the lady and the house by the sea disappeared. And his dog died soon after. Born in County Kilkenny in 1263, to a family of wealthy Flemish merchants, Alice Keitler has been remembered in history as the first person to be condemned for witchcraft in Ireland. According to Alice's house servant, Petronella de Meath, Robert was the name of the demon that Alice made offerings to gain her arcane powers, a right hand of Satan himself who often appeared as three distinct and imp-like men. Petronella testified against Alice in court, and she was accused of heresy, sacrifices to, and intercourse with demonic entities, making love and hate potions to corrupt Christians, and the murder her previous husbands, of which she had 4, who were all now dead. However, the servant woman's testimonies against her mistress stacked the cards against both of them in the end. It became a popular belief that Petronella had assisted Alice in her misdeeds, and Petronella was burned at the stake, becoming the very first person in Ireland to suffer this brutal fate. Alice Keitler was neither burned nor buried on Irish soil. The story goes that she fled to the safety of England, but this take is little more than an educated guess, and after the death of Petronella, Alice disappears entirely from historical records. What we do know, however, is that she seems to have taken with her a ward, in the form of Petronella's young daughter, whose name was Basilia. Known in her time as the Witch of Youghal, Florence Newton was the central player of what would become known as one of Ireland's most important witch trials. The accusations levelled at her were many, and varied. During Christmas of 1660, she was heard to mumble curses beneath her breath about being passed over by a plate of beef at a party, thrown by a man named John Pine. Shortly after this, she met with a servant of Pine's named Mary London on the street, and violently kissed her. It wasn't long after this incident that Mary began to take ill, suffering fits, cramps, and unnatural visions. Around this time, whisperings had already begun that a coven of witches had made their home in Youghal. The proof locals claimed was in the needles, pins, horse nails, wool, and straw that Mary began to throw up. Mary claimed that the mastermind behind her ailment was Florence, and so she was arrested and imprisoned on March 24, 1661. Florence Newton was also blamed for the death of a local man named David Jones, during her trial. Later, his widow claimed that she had seen Florence kiss her late husband's hand through the bars of her confinement. He became aggressively ill, and on his deathbed could muster the energy only to shout out the name, Newton. On September 11, 1661, Florence Newton was tried at assizes, in County Cork, for the enchantment of Mary London and for employing sorcery to bring about the death of David Jones. The verdict? Unconfirmed. Essential court documents have been missing since well before historians ever began looking into the case. If Florence was found guilty, she would have been put to death, as all ascertained witches were at the time. And if she was innocent, we may never know. Not all alleged Irish witches were the kind to consort with Satan's helpers, or lay hexes on those who did them wrong. The renowned Biddy Early, for example, is best understood as a white witch or folk healer. Beloved by many for her charming personality and clever way with natural remedies. Born around 1798, Biddy was known to be heard talking to the fairies during her early years, and was as kind and full of wit as she was stubborn. Her mother, Ellen, was a renowned herbalist, and taught her daughter all that she knew. Biddy was an unusual woman by many counts, and, as such, was a prime target for witchcraft accusations by the Catholic Church, who disliked her wild streak. She married 3 times, and in an unorthodox twist, her final husband was much younger than she. Biddy traded natural cures for whiskey with her neighbors, then invited everyone over to drink and play cards. She trekked out to farms to help restore spring wells and treat dying crops. Her immense popularity was, to the church, a threat, but it was also her safeguard. In 1865, at the age of 67, she was accused of witchcraft and was brought before a court in Ennis, County Clare. The small number of people who agreed to testify against her soon dropped their charges, and her many friends in the community rallied to support her. Before long, the case was dropped due to lack of sufficient evidence. And, as she had been doing her whole life long, Biddy Early walked free. She died peacefully 9 years later. There is a well-known Irish nursery rhyme that's sung as follows. Are you a witch, or are you a fairy? Or are you the wife of Michael Cleary? The story of the woman in question, however, is far from the stuff of children's bedtime stories. Born in 1869, into the Boland family, Bridget grew up in County Tipperary. She met and married Michael Cleary in the late summer of 1887. It was, it seemed, love at first sight, and they married within the month. He made his living as a cooper, she, a dressmaker whose talents were lauded far and wide. Bridget was an uncommonly professional young lady for the times in which she lived. With the help of her ultra-modern, Singer sewing machine, she made her own steady stream of income alongside her husband, and all seemed well, until suddenly, in March of 1895, she went missing. What we know is this. Prior to Bridget's vanishing, she had been evidently ill for several days. Her diagnosis was recorded as bronchitis, and it set in fast, so much so that the abrupt change in Bridget's appearance and attitude led her husband and father to believe that a fairy changeling had taken her place. Urine was thrown onto her, and she was brought before the fireplace to force the fairy out of her body. The rest, tragically, isn't hard to guess. On March 22, Bridget's burned body was found in a shallow grave near her home. When questioned, Michael continued to insist that his wife had been taken away by the fairies, and in the trial that ensued, it became clear that he believed through burning the changeling to death, the malevolent creatures would bring his wife back to him. Michael was charged for manslaughter. Today, Bridget Cleary is famously known as the last witch burned in Ireland, though she was never actually described as practicing the dark arts. Since her death, her story has been covered extensively, even reaching the New York Times within a month of its occurrence. And that, my friends, is the story about my sister witches, from times past. Thank you for watching, bye for now.